Welcome back, lovely people. Thank you so much for joining me today. If this is your first time, welcome. If this is not your first time, thanks for coming back. Thanks for joining me again. I appreciate you so very much. Today is going to be a little bit of a doozy video for me, being that I just kind of started getting into all this video stuff. But I've been really kind of wanting to put together this list for a little while. Actually, not for a little while. I just finished The Lost Metal, well, at the end of January. Just finally finished that. And there was, as a lot of us who are Sanderson fans know, a lot of tie-ins with previous books in the Cosmere. And I kind of found myself stopping a little bit and, one, getting really excited at the Easter eggs, finding those, recognizing them, seeing them, and kind of just going, ooh, I know what this is. But two, kind of thinking to myself, wow, there's a lot of stuff in here that if someone hasn't read book A, B, C, or D, they're going to understand this story, but they're going to miss those Easter eggs. And I think they're really fun to have in that book. And so I kind of wanted to go through a relatively comprehensive Cosmere reading list. Subjective, of course. We can have differing opinions and still be friends, and it's okay, I promise. So if you don't agree with this reading order, that's completely fine. This is, however, what my brain says on where I would suggest reading certain things and in what order. And I'm going to give a little bit of reasons why, but I'm not going to get into any spoilers today. So don't worry about being spoiled for anything. That's not going to happen here. So the first thing I want to clarify just a little bit is there are going to be some novellas and short stories that I'm going to mention that are included in this Arcanum Unbounded book. It is a pretty hefty book. So if I say Arcanum Unbounded, if you're not sure what that means or you're new to Sanderson, hi, if you're new to Sanderson, it's a wonderful time. Welcome to the series. This is the book I'm referring to, and this is where you can find those novellas and or short stories. Ooh. There are a few that are either in here and also elsewhere. Like they just released the hardcover little novella version of Mistborn Secret History, I think it was. Is that the novella? I have them all on my desk. I should probably check before yeah, Secret History. It is also in here, so you don't have to buy it separately. You can just buy this one volume. This is what I'm referring to when I talk about Arcanum Unbounded, or it being involved or included in the collection of stories. That's this guy right here. Now, what I did is I did look online a little bit to see some of the reading orders that have been suggested before The Lost Metal came out, before Tress of the Emerald Sea was released, and I even think before Rhythm of War was released. I didn't go too in-depth in looking at a lot of other people's reading orders. I kind of wanted to make this as much as my own without outside influence, but there were a few that I wasn't really sure if, due to having read them a little while ago and just not really seeing a lot of connection, I wasn't sure exactly where they should fit. So there's going to be a few with little caveats where I'm going to say this could really go anywhere and you'll be fine. And the first of such books is going to be White Sand. White Sand is the graphic novel that Sanderson wrote originally in prose form, I believe, and then it was turned into a graphic novel. It could have been the other way around, I'm not really sure, but there is a prose version. If you go to the 17th Shard website, you can request to have the prose version emailed to you. So the prose version is available to download for free. It is or does not follow as closely to this as I kind of would have hoped, but there is also a graphic audio version of this 3-volume series. This is the deluxe hardcover in single volume that just went through Indiegogo. I'm in love with it. I've already read through the 3 volumes, and I listened to the graphic audio versions of the graphic novel. So I've already consumed the story, but I haven't actually consumed it in the updated version that this is. So I'm actually really excited to get to this. But since I literally just listened to the graphic novels last year, I'm going to wait a little bit before I actually dive into this new version here. Maybe pick it up at the end of the year or beginning of next year and see if I can just kind of point out some of the differences that were done in this version here. But I did start a whole Cosmere reread last year. I ended up getting through 20 of Sanderson's works, Cosmere and some non-Cosmere. So I have about 10 more, not including the next 2 secret projects that are both Cosmere related, to go this year. And hopefully I will be completely caught up on the Cosmere with everything that's been released. But White Sand is one of those that I think is pretty commonly recommended to just start off at the beginning. It's fun. You really could read it anywhere. but it is canon per Sanderson himself. So there are magic systems, or this magic system here, and the characters that are involved in this story are involved elsewhere that we're going to see or have seen. So eventually you're definitely going to want to read this before we get caught up with Stormlight Archive and the second half of that 10-book series, because this is going to become, I think, more important. At least the characters, some of the characters are going to become more important as we go through the Stormlight Archive. So as for right now, you could really pick this up at any time, anywhere, but I do recommend just right at the beginning. It's just a kind of a fun introduction in visual format to get into Sanderson's Cosmere, and it has some really good characters and a really neat magic system. I mean, we all know Sanderson's magic systems are just top-notch in a lot of ways. It is a little reminiscent of Tress's magic system and the idea of sand and spores. It's a good introduction. I enjoy it. I'm going to probably reminisce and get back to it again sometime next year, depending on where I get with the Cosmere this year. I might reread it at the end of the year after I've gone through everything else. Continuing on, we're going to start with probably the most recommended starting place for beginners within the Cosmere, or even fantasy as well. And that is going to be the Mistborn trilogy. We have the first Mistborn book, which is technically called The Final Empire. This is by far the most recommended starting point for Sanderson and Cosmere in general. It isn't where I personally would recommend some people. I would recommend this for maybe beginners into fantasy in a way, but if you've been steeped in fantasy for a long time, like I had, before I had started the Cosmere, really, I think you could be safe starting with Stormlight Archive. Now, obviously, there's going to be a little bit of a caveat when it comes with, okay, do you want the full Cosmere experience, or are you just looking for a single story for enjoyment? If you want the full Cosmere experience, which is kind of what we're going through today, I do recommend starting with the first Mistborn book. This is going to be a great introduction, wonderful magic systems. I'm not going to talk about too much because I think everybody really knows about Mistborn, has heard about it. If you're here and you're interested in a Cosmere walkthrough, you've probably already heard about Mistborn, but we do have a magic system that deals with metals, ingesting of metals that then give people certain powers. Some people can only control one. Some people can control all of them. If you can control all of them, you are a Mistborn. Our main character is trying to basically save her people from an evil tyrant ruler who won the last battle, I think hundreds or thousands of years ago. I forget exactly the time frame. I've been through a lot of Cosmere books. So this is a great start. It is great characters, absolutely phenomenal. My first read of this, I was blown away. Absolutely loved it. I just did my third reread last year because, again, I was doing my Cosmere reread, and so I did my third listen through last year, and it does hold up. It's a great series. That's where I would start. In between books 1 and 2, I personally would recommend taking a small little break and going into the short story, The 11th Metal. This will go and kind of give you more of a in-depth idea of Kelsier's past in a way, and I think it just is a nice little break between books 1 and 2. It will not take that long to get through it. It is included in the Arcanum Unbounded collection, so it's something that you'll already have along with the rest of those short stories and novellas if you purchase that book, and it will give you a little bit of a background on one of our favorite characters, Kelsier, and a little bit of his history. Once you've finished the 11th Metal, I recommend going straight into books 2 and 3 of Mistborn, that is the Well of Ascension, and the Hero of Ages. This is going to be the, of course, end of Era 1. I almost said Era 2. End of Era 1, and phenomenal ending. The Well of Ascension does, I think, suffer a little bit from middle book syndrome. I don't know why that was so difficult to say. And it does slog a little bit in the center, in my opinion. I didn't feel the slog so much upon my first reread. I definitely felt the slog upon my third reread. Obviously, that's going to be subjective, and because I have already consumed the story twice before, I know what's happening, I know what's going to happen, and I'm waiting to get there, so all that middle stuff kind of slowed the pace down for me. But I think upon first reread, it's going to be just fine. You're not going to really experience that much of a slog, especially if you don't mind a more slower paced, kind of character focused in that aspect, which I believe the middle book, in the middle of the middle book especially, kind of more is. So wrap up with Era 1, and then we'll move on to the next installment that I suggest. And that next installment is going to be the novella, The Secret History. Again, this is included in the Arcanum Unbounded. You do not need to purchase this separately. I have it because it matches the other two novellas that were within the Stormlight Archive, one that we got from the Kickstarter. Both that we got from the Kickstarter? I can't remember. It doesn't matter. But this is a really fascinating novella. Do not read this until after Mistborn Era 1. There are spoilers in this novella. Don't think you're going to get a leg up and you'll read something small first. No. Read this after Mistborn Era 1. There are some people that even will say read it after Arrow 2 Book 1 or whatnot. I personally don't think you need to wait that long, but you definitely need to wait until after Arrow 1 is completely finished before you pick this one up. But this is a really, really fascinating novella that gives a much deeper, in-depth look at some of the components and aspects of the magic and the deities, the ideas of deities within the Cosmere. And I think it's going to be really interesting for people who have read Mistborn before, personally, and have not picked this up. If you pick this up, you're going to kind of go, ooh, what is this? And then absolutely this must be read before you read The Lost Metal. Must be read before you read The Lost Metal. I do think you could wait until after Bands of Mourning. I don't know why you would. I personally would not. But this needs to be read. This needs to be read. Words are difficult. Before The Lost Metal. After the novella, we're going to get into Brandon Sanderson's first published book in the Cosmere. Actually, I believe it was his first published novel, if I remember correctly. They're all jumbling together. That is going to be Elantris. I'm sorry for my floppy paperback. I don't have the hardcover yet. And after Elantris is going to be the Emperor's Soul novella that is included within the same world, but with completely different characters, completely different magic system, but it is within the same world. It is one of his weaker stories. I personally enjoy it. It is slower. It is more character focused in a lot of ways. But if you're okay with a slow pace, then you probably will do well with this. It is not one that I will go back and reread in the Cosmere for more entertainment's sake, unless I'm doing an actual full Cosmere reread. But I did still enjoy it. It is a good start when you consider it being one of his first published, if not his first published novel. And this is the one that I would read now after Mistborn, just to kind of give yourself a little bit of a palate cleanser. Get it over with. I know that sounds mean. That sounds mean, but to get it over with, it is currently a standalone, so it's a one book and done read. And there are things that I believe are popping up in The Lost Metal that were confirmed, but I also have a theory that wasn't confirmed. I have not heard anyone say anything about this theory yet, but I also haven't really dove too deep because I'm nervous of spoiling some stuff for myself that I don't really necessarily want to know yet. But if you read this and then kind of keep an open mind of some of the magic that's involved in here, I think you'll see it pop up in The Lost Metal in certain ways, if my theory is right, but I could be completely wrong. But I would read this one now, get it done, out of the way, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. Along with that, too, is going to be the novella, The Emperor's Soul. Like I said, this does take place in the same world as Elantris, but it is a completely different character, different magic system, different everything. And this is, by far, in my opinion, one of Sanderson's best works to date. When I first read this book, I thought, that was good. That was okay. I just did my re-listen, and I did a re-listen, I believe, of the graphic novel. Did I listen to it off of Hoopla, I think? I'm not sure. But I listened to the graphic novel, and I don't know what it was, but for some reason, halfway through listening to this book, I was just sort of trying to get into really consecutively reading again. And I had the warmest, fuzziest feels of just absolutely loving being a reader. Loving being a consumer of stories, because I don't know what it was. I don't even know what part I was at this book, but there was something about it that just gave me all the warm, fuzzy feelings inside, that I was just so happy that I am someone who gets enjoyment out of consuming stories like this. It was just such a good feeling. I even texted my best friend. I said, I'm just so glad I'm a reader. I'm so glad I enjoy reading. But that aside, the subjective personal feelings aside, this is a wonderful book. It is short. It's a novella. I believe it is also included in the Arcanum Unbounded. I should probably check that. It is in the Arcanum Unbounded. It is also in there with the short story that is a sequel to Elantris itself. Now, if you want to read that, go for it. It's a very short story. You'll get through it in no time. It is not in any way, shape, or form necessary for the overall Cosmere. It is technically a Cosmere story, so if you wanted to do a full Cosmere read, you would of course have to include that, in which case put that in after Elantris. It's an immediate sequel to the end of Elantris. Has nothing to do with Emperor's Soul, but it definitely wraps up a little bit more in some other characters' points of view what happens in the end of Elantris. But the Emperor's Soul, 100% again, read before the Lost Metal. I would recommend just reading it after Elantris just to get done with that planet and get done with that system. Or you could wait till before the Lost Metal if you wanted to. You could read this anytime between now up to reading the Lost Metal, but I would just recommend reading it now since it is part of the Elantrian world, planet, system, what have you. But absolutely before the Lost Metal so that you have context as to what is in the Lost Metal and what it really means, because it's involved in this book. It is severely explained in this book, which is what is necessary. You will still be able to get the concept of it in the Lost Metal without reading this, so that's not a worry there. You won't be confused. Sanderson does a great job at explaining it in the Lost Metal for those who haven't read this, but it is one of those things that you kind of go, I understand what's happening. I get what she's doing. I get it. And that's just a fun feeling to have. So get this one in before the Lost Metal. Next, we're going to knock out another standalone, and that is going to be Warbreaker. And this one I think plenty of people have heard of as well. When readers ask for good standalone recommendations, I see this one recommended a lot. One, because it is Sanderson, and he is one of the most prolific authors, as we know. But two, because it is a single, cohesive, compact story that does work well as a standalone. We will be getting a second one eventually. Not sure exactly when, but it will happen. But it does hold on its own, and it absolutely is a full, cohesive story. Now, there are aspects, characters, certain aspects of this book that do show up in the later Cosmere books, but it is not something, in my opinion, that you have to know of in depth yet. It's kind of more of, hey, that's a nice Easter egg. Cool, that was neat to see. But as a caveat, I have not read the last two Stormlight Archive books. Now, I know there are going to be spoilers in the Stormlight Archive, I believe, for Warbreaker, or at least a character, I believe. So I do recommend, of course, getting this read before Stormlight in any capacity, just so you have that sort of connection. But when it comes to Mistborn itself and reading up through the Stormlight, it's not necessary to really have this read to at least consume through Mistborn Era 2. And that's kind of where I started in putting this list together, and it just kind of evolved into more. But read this before Stormlight Archive in order to get all those Easter eggs, and I think this would be a really good start while you're in between Era 1 and Era 2 and kind of wrapping up a lot of those individual novels, short stories, and novellas to experience them, consume them, and then put them aside before we hop into the thicker series. Now, this is where things get a little crazier because we're going to start Mistborn Era 2. But throughout Mistborn Era 2, in my opinion, there needs to be a little bouncing happen between Mistborn Era 2, some novellas, some short stories, and Stormlight. And if you want to grab them all individually, finish Mistborn Era 2, finish Stormlight, and you're not worried about the Cosmere tie-ins, go for it. If you're just looking for that experience of getting through a series and enjoying the series as it is, go for it. Don't listen to me. Have fun. Absolutely have fun. But if you're looking for the Easter eggs and what order to kind of get them to work well together, this is the order that my brain kind of came up with on short notice after looking at some of these books and finishing The Lost Metal. So the first one we're going to start with is Mistborn Era 2, Book 1. That's Alloy of Law. This is going to be a couple 100 years, I forget exactly, after the end of Mistborn Era 1, and we follow Wax and Wayne. Now, because a lot of people have been talking about this series being that it was just wrapped up in book 4, I am not going to go into talking about this. I am just going to tell you my ideas of going through what order works best, in my opinion. So Mistborn Era 2, Book 1, Alloy of Law. That starts our Era 2 journey, and it gives us the introduction into this new Mistborn world that is much different from Era 1. And I personally, my first read was, this is different. I'm not sure how I feel about it. Yeah, I like it. It's okay. Not a Western fan. My second read through, my most recent read through, these past last couple months in 2022, I freaking love this series. I love it so much. I have all the love and feels for bromance, and there is bromance between these two. I am all for it. I've also been listening to the graphic audios, which in my opinion make the listening experience, reading experience 10 times better than any either reading it yourself or even the regular audiobook, which Michael Kramer is phenomenal. I'm not saying anything against Michael Kramer. I did consume The Lost Metal in the regular audiobook and it was wonderful. But I have to hype up graphic audio. They are phenomenal. So we're going to start off with this one being the next one to read in the Cosmere. After Era 2, Book 1, I would recommend reading the short story in the Arcanum Unbounded called Allomancer Jack, and it's a longer title than that, but it's a quick short story that kind of gives a little bit of a look into an interesting fellow in Mistborn Era 2 that only really kind of shows up in the broadsheets, in the newspaper of Era 2, and he is talked about later on in the series and mentioned by some of our main characters, as well as the adventures that he goes on in the broadsheets. It's just a quick, fun little short story. I recommend reading that after Book 1, just to get it, again, done and over with, but at least it'll be that kind of context when they bring him up at any time later on in Era 2. From there, we are going to hop into the Stormlight Archive, and we're going to go to The Way of Kings. This is Book 1 of the Stormlight Archive. I will talk about this book later on in some other video about what it means to me and where it falls in on my favorites, but this book is very, 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 very dear to my heart. I have three copies of it. It's outrageous. This is my reading copy. The others I have are either hardcover or collectors. And this starts our first half of the 10-book Stormlight Archive. The Stormlight Archive is going to be split into 2 parts, and the second part is going to have, I believe, a 5-year time jump between books 5 and 6. We are almost done with he's almost done with book 5. We will probably be getting that sometime next year, so this is a perfect time to jump into all these books. You'll have plenty of time to get through the Cosmere before that last one in part 1 comes out, hopefully next year. Hopefully it won't be pushed back, but if not, that's okay. I'm willing to wait for awesome. But this is where I would go next. This is where things kind of get complicated in the reading portion of this and what comes up where. And I don't think it's necessarily super important to read this right now, but I do believe that books 1 and 2 of Stormlight need to be consumed before The Lost Metal, so you can kind of get some of those references and what's happening, as well as reading at least the first 2 before Tress, which we'll get there. So this is where I would put this as my recommendation, is starting this one next, and that will start your Stormlight Archive adventure, which is so exciting. After The Way of Kings, we're going to jump back into Era 2 with the next book, Shadows of Self, book 2 of the Wax and Wane in Era 2 of Mistborn. There's not really much more to say on this. This is book 2 of 4, and this is where things kind of kick off a little bit more, where you kind of fall more in love with the characters. Book 1 is a little bit jarring, being that it is so different, but book 2 kind of feels like jumping back into something that's a little bit more comfortable now. So that's where I would go next, and it kind of feels like you're almost right along those of us who were waiting for these books to be released. So we weren't reading them, obviously. Boom, 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 1, 2, 3, 4. We had to take breaks. And so that's kind of breaks things up a little bit. So 1, you don't get burnt out on one story overall. 2, kind of have the same wait time as what we would have, if depending on how fast of a reader you are. And it breaks things up a little bit. But this is the next one that I would go to, book 2, Era 2 of Mistborn. And hopping back to Stormlight again, we're going to book 2, Words of Radiance in the Stormlight Archive. We did a little bit of hopping, and it's kind of be the same as we go, but from here, we're learning more about Stormlight, which again is going to start showing up in the end of Era 2 Mistborn, so there are chunky books. So it does give you a little bit of a break when it comes to Mistborn. Mistborn gives you a break when it comes to Stormlight, but these do take time to read, so of course you'll have that break in between the Mistborn books to consume these. But another really amazing continuation into this series. This is the last book in the Stormlight that I personally have consumed. I do, however, know a few spoilers from books 3 and 4 because I just can't keep my eyeballs off of spoilers and lives and other videos. But so I do know a little bit more of what happens in 3 and 4, but I have at least fully consumed 1 and 2, and this is where I would suggest putting this next read is after book 2 of Mistborn Era 2. From there, we're going to stay in the Stormlight for just a little bit longer, and I'm going to suggest going with the novella Edge Dancer. So Edge Dancer is in the Arcanum Unbounded, so yay! You do not have to get this little hardcover just like the Secret History, but again, I like my stuff to match because I'm a weird person and collector like that. So I got this little one here. Short novella within the Stormlight. I do recommend that if you're going to be reading the novellas, that you keep them in this order that I am putting the Stormlight books as well. This one should be read after book 2 of the Stormlight Archive. And since we are going through books 1 through 4 that we have so far, I'm throwing this in there because I am trying to make this a little bit more of a comprehensive full Cosmere reading order as well. So do recommend reading this as well as everything else, but definitely after book 2 of Stormlight. Next up, we have the 3rd book in Mistborn Era 2. That is going to be the Bands of Mourning. This is where things really kick off and start to get a little bit more Cosmere involved. This is kind of where things have started to mesh a little bit in a way. And after this book, Writing the Lost Metal, Sanderson had decided that he was going to start merging more of the Cosmere books. So this is kind of what kicks that off a little bit in very small, minute ways. But it's a good way to, or it's a good time to go into this 3rd book here, get that finished and read before hopping into the next one. Editing Casey here, popping in to say that I did leave out one of 2 novellas. The first one is going to be Sixth of the Dusk. I personally have not read this one myself, but I have seen people online say that it really should be read before Oathbringer, as there are a few things that tie into that book within the Stormlight. So that one is included in the Arcanum Unbounded as well as the others, and I personally have not read it yet, but I do plan on reading it soon, probably when I do my Stormlight reread, or when I get to my Stormlight reread. That next one being the 3rd Stormlight, Oathbringer. Hey, she's a chonker. She's thick. And I have not read this one yet. I did start it when I first got it, when it first came out, but then I decided to wait until I had a few more to read so I could binge, because I'm a binger. And I was going to pick it up when the 4th one came out, and then I decided I was going to pick up this one and the 4th one and do a full reread when the 5th one came out, and that was delayed a little bit. So now I'm just going to include it in my Cosmere reading. But this is the 3rd book in Stormlight Archive. I would absolutely read this after Edge Dancer and still before The Lost Metal. And same as Edge Dancer, we have another novella, Dawn Shard, and this one 100% read after book 3 of Stormlight. These are little extra tidbits of characters that are in the the main Stormlight Archive series, so they're not necessary for the story, but, this is a full Cosmere reading suggestion, so why would I leave them out? We want to know more about characters. Always want to know more about characters. So this one after book 3, a little bit, it's book technically 3.5, just as Edge Dancer was 2.5. So scoot this one in there. It should be a really quick read. It's just a novella. I guess his novellas tend to be a little bit longer than normal novellas, but still very consumable, especially after everything we've already read. Okay, we are almost done. Are we tired of listening to me talk? Because I'm getting a little tired of talking. We have just 3 more? 3 more to go over at the moment. And the first, I do not have my physical copy yet. I was hoping to kind of wait until this came in, but I haven't even gotten my shipping confirmation yet, especially since they're sending them out in batches. So I'm pretty sure mine's probably going to be one of the later batches. And that is going to be Tress of the Emerald Sea. That, of course, is Secret Project number 1, the newest release of Sanderson's at this time. People are starting to get their books. I'm very jealous because I want mine, and it's very, very pretty. And so I'm excited to get that in hand. I have finished it on ebook, and it was wonderful. It was an absolutely wonderful story. I was not expecting to feel as strongly about it as I did when I finished it. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about a whimsical Sanderson story. I don't know that I've ever read anything that Sanderson has written that's been considered whimsical. So at first I wasn't really sure about it, and then I kind of stopped about chapter 15 to start Lost Metal, and I'm so glad I put the Lost Metal down to finish Tress first. I do recommend finishing Tress before you finish Lost Metal. Now, if you start the Lost Metal before starting Tress, because the Lost Metal has come out beforehand, and of course the general public is not going to have access to Tress for a little bit longer, maybe stop at about chapter 39 or so in the Lost Metal, read Tress, and then come back. Again, like I said before, it is not going to ruin your reading experience of the Lost Metal to not have read Tress. Sanderson does a great job of delivering the information that you need to know in order to enjoy the Lost Metal, but there are components, there are magic systems, there are some characters, there are things that happen, and overall components of the story in the Lost Metal that would have so much more context if you have read and consumed a lot of these stories first, especially Tress, especially Emperor's Soul, a little bit of Elantris, and then the Secret History, Mistborn as well. Of course, as well as the rest of the Mistborn books, obviously. But that being said, I would highly recommend Tress of the Emerald Sea coming next. And then finally, we're getting to the Lost Metal. Now you might be saying, well, what about Rhythm of War? If you wanted to read Rhythm of War before the Lost Metal, absolutely go for it. But I figured because we did read some of the Stormlight archives just before this book, didn't we? Yes, we read Oathbringer just before this book, that we would go with The Last Mistborn, tie up kind of all those loose ends. You know enough about Stormlight at this point to understand the Easter eggs that are in here, what few of them there are, and you can enjoy this book before reading Rhythm of War. You can also enjoy it after reading Rhythm of War. Either way works, but this is the order that I'm putting it in so that we could wrap up and end on Rhythm of War. This is the one that I just most recently finished, and there were so many times in the second half of this book where I was just smiling. Just, I know what that's from. I know what that is. Lost Metal next, which leads us into our final book, and that's going to be Rhythm of War. The fourth book in the Stormlight Archive, not the last one. We do have the last one coming out hopefully next year, as stated before. This one, of course, I have not yet read either. I have heard conflicting reviews on this book. I've heard that it's either some people's absolute favorite so far of Stormlight, and it's been some people's least favorite so far of Stormlight. I've heard very, very few in between. There are a couple people I've listened to who have said it was okay, but that's just not their favorite, and it just really kind of lacked. It has middle book syndrome, and so that kind of makes me a little bit nervous. So that is the final book in the Cosmere reading order a la Casey's subjective opinion. You can disagree, and we can still be friends. It's okay. Hi, Editing Casey here again. So I forgot another novella that is involved or included in the Arcanum Unbounded, and that is going to be The Shadows for Silence in the Forests of Hell. This is a novella that can really be read at any time, anywhere. So whether you want to read it at the very end of everything or at the very beginning or anywhere in the middle, just as a sort of palate cleanser, that's 100% fine to do. There really isn't any connections to any other books yet with this one, but I wanted to throw that in there. I completely forgot about it as well as the other one already mentioned, so my bad. I will try to do better next time. If you have a different opinion on which order these books should be read, please share it. Feel free to say yay or nay in any of these or this order at any time. I am absolutely 100% open to reasons or explanations as to why we think a book should fit elsewhere. And without spoilers, of course, please keep it spoiler free for anybody who's here just looking for a reading order or a place to start without being spoiled by anything. We don't want to be that group and those people. So please keep it spoiler free, but I would absolutely love to hear your recommendations on what reading order and what book should go where. Very curious as to see the differences and what everyone else thinks. And if this is a decent order that you agree with, let me know too. I'm kind of curious as to whether this works for other Cosmere fans, if they would agree with this order, or if they find, or if you find any kind of issues with it. So absolutely let me know. Thank you so much again for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me for however long this video ends up being, and I hope I didn't ramble too much for you. I will be coming back soon with my February TBR. I know it's going to be a little bit late, but you know, we're never on time here, and I make videos whenever I feel like it because I have a full-time job and I'm a single homeowner and I don't have time, but I want to make more videos as when I can without overstressing myself. So we'll be coming back with a February TBR and as well as a January book haul at some point to go over the books that came in during January. So keep an eye out for both of those videos coming soon, and I will see you next time. Bye!